Welcome to the Legal Insurrection podcast. Today is November 1st, so happy November. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about garbage, firing squads, and, all the normal election things. My name is Kemberlee, Kaye, and I'm the editorial and operations director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor William Jacobson. So let's go ahead and jump in. Of all the headlines this last week, this week in particular has been comical and also not comical. So let's first start, I guess, with the garbage comments that Joe Biden made and how that ended up turning into really what's scandalous on the part of the White House and also legacy media. Do you want to fill listeners in on like just the story and kind of how this has all played out and at least where we are on that story as of today?
Sure. So Joe Biden on a Zoom call with what were portrayed as Latino supporters, some activist group, made a comment that the only uh, garbage he sees out there are Trump supporters. And that was a reference to a line that a comedian who virtually nobody probably has even heard of, I'd never heard of him before, made early on in the Trump Madison Square Garden event that there's an island out there floating with garbage, and it's called Puerto Rico. And anybody who's the least bit knowledgeable knows he was making fun of what has been extensively covered in the news of Puerto Rico having a very major landfill problem and garbage is piling up. It was not directed at Puerto Ricans as people and things like that.
Mhm.
Nonetheless, it was something that the media and the Democrats completely seized on. And really, they've driven to a great effect, which then Biden responded to in that call and said, the only garbage I see floating around out there are his supporters. And then what happened is the media and the White House immediately began to cover for that and say, oh no, he's being misquoted. He's being mistranscribed. It was an apostrophe because later in the sentence, he talks about, disgusting comments about Puerto Rico. So they tried to portray it. The only garbage are his supporters, apostrophe S, comments about Puerto Rico. But that's not what he said. And we all heard it. We all saw it. It was on video. But the White House put out an official transcript with the apostrophe, and the media used that as the excuse to say how Republicans were complaining about nothing. Well, it turns out that the White House changed the transcription that the official stenographers of the White House had done. That the White House has official stenographers who are meant to preserve what the president says. I forget what the act is, Presidential Records Act, whatever, but they are the official record of what a president does. And they produced a transcript, which was exactly the way we all heard it. And the White House changed it and then handed it out. And that's a scandal. That's illegal. They're not allowed to do that. And it just shows how manipulative they were. So that's the scandal, is not just the garbage comments, but that the White House unlawfully altered the official presidential record to help Kamala Harris's political campaign.
So this crosses the line in so many different ways. I mean, because there's a hard and fast rule too, and many laws and regulations to enforce the rule that the campaign side and the actual administrative side are not supposed to be in communication with each other in certain ways, or they're not supposed to be working with each other in certain ways. um, and that's definitely not what happened here. And then you have the legacy media involvement. And I mean, really, if there's anything that's garbage right now, it's all of the, and when I say legacy media, I mean the cable networks. I mean all of these different entities, the papers that have been around for ages, the ones that have the largest microphones, that they're in complete and total disarray, that there's no way they can hide the interference that they're running for either the Harris campaign or the Biden administration at this point, to the point where they're willing to gaslight the public in order to change transcripts. And we've seen this before. We've seen them selectively editing things with Kamala's interviews refusing to release the transcripts. We still don't know all the questions she was asked, how she answered those things. They just cut and splice in a way that's favorable and advantageous to her. This is just this is not reporting. It's not honest. And in no way is Trump getting a fair shake as a result. No one is. No one who disagrees with a particular school of thought is getting an opportunity for a fair election. I mean, I think it's really that bad. It's not a little bias here and there. The links that they have gone through, just the things that we know about. So I think it's safe to assume that we know about a handful of things that have happened, but how many more have happened that we are still unaware of? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's as bad as I've ever seen. I mean, we have outright manipulation. We have another incident today where people like Cassie Hunt at CNN are just outright lying about something that Trump said. Trump was being interviewed, I think it was by Tucker Carlson at one of the events, and he made a statement very similar to what Democrats have made during the Bush years, essentially accusing people of being chicken hawks, that they're really
Mhm.
brave when they're not the ones doing the fighting. And so he says, basically, she is one of these ultra hawks, but I don't think she would be that way if she actually had the guns pointed at her. From that, you have the media and the left wing media, but also places like CNN saying Trump calls for Cheney to be shot. It's just factually false. That's not what he said.
Mhm.
So this is as bad as I've ever seen it. They are hiding things. They're changing transcripts. They're lying about things. Really, I've come back to this on prior shows. That saying, you don't hate the media enough. You really don't. I mean, these are bad people. These are people who are manipulating our political system. And as Kimberly said, it's not a little bit of bias. Yes, everybody's got a little bit of bias. We've got it. Conservative media has it. Everybody's got their own perspective. They're just making stuff up. That's what's so crazy. I don't think we have a fair election system given the media. Somebody, a professor at Northeastern, someone I have followed on Twitter, Max Abrams, tweeted out earlier today, before the latest thing broke with the Cheney comments. It's amazing a Republican can even contend for the presidency given the media bias against them. And he's not like a right wing person, but it's true, and it's not new this election cycle, but it seems particularly bad because Trump is involved. And so, Republicans need to not only defeat a Democrat candidate, they need to defeat the media. And I saw some statistics about how legacy media, the three major networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, how their viewership has dropped over the years. And if you look at the chart, it's pretty obviously it's dropped. But CBS, the lowest of the three, is still at 6 million viewers for their news program. That's double what Fox News is. So the least watched legacy media news program, CBS, still has double the viewership of Fox News, which is the largest, by far, conservative or not at least liberal uh, media outlet. And so it really is daunting if you think back what this race would look like if Kamala Harris had been subject to the sort of examination that a Republican would be subjected to. So it's really disheartening. I hope they don't win. And even Jeff Bezos, explaining what he's doing at Washington Post, said, the media is not trusted anymore. And he was doing it, explaining in terms of the Washington Post and why they're not going
Mhm.
to endorse this year. And that if Trump wins, that will be a devastating blow to the legacy media. And it will be. And they deserve it. They deserve every bit of it. They're
No, I
terrible
completely
people
agree.
who are manipulating our system.
Yeah, because they've put all of their eggs into this destroy and dehumanize. Um, Trump, especially in particular, of course, he's the largest target, but anyone and everyone who disagrees with them to an outrageous degree. And when we see this on a small scale, the climate that they have created, and I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, where people are afraid to come forward if they see things, because not everyone has the luxury, as you and I do, of um, of saying what we think about things and of being honest in our commentary. Many people are forced to keep that under wraps for fear of retribution, even on a smaller scale, for what these people, because they know too that even local media, I mean, this is filtered all the way down. And I think it's important to understand too how these affiliates work and how the Associated Press wire works. You know, if you have what you basically have a handful of very large news outlets that create the news, and then that news is distributed to every local Fox whatever as part of their national news coverage, or every single NBC affiliate and their local news coverage. And so these things are not necessarily being covered on a local level. And when you have the kind of rot and corruption that we're seeing now in all major media outlets, it's very disheartening. And I don't at all think it's hyperbolic to suggest and even believe that they are actively manipulating an election cycle. And I hate to use these words because the internet has so diluted the meaning of things, um, with people rushing to ridiculous terms that aren't applicable. But I mean, to call this propaganda is 100% accurate, because we're seeing the media was supposed to be the fourth estate. They were supposed to be an extra balance. They were supposed to be checking the power of the institutions that were elected. We don't see that anymore. We don't see that at all. We see them trying to bolster certain people and certain ideologies and tearing down everything that doesn't agree with that. And it's just, I mean, and I know we've touched on this before too, but it is a very intentional thing, I believe, to destroy so many facets of our culture, so many facets of our society. I think there was a very successful effort in 2020 to destroy our faith in the electoral system, and the fact that we believed, at least most people believed for a very long time, that we have fair elections. And now most of the country cannot say that with certainty. And it's the same thing with the media. There was a point in time where opposing values, opposing views would be presented, but we still had some kind of general consensus of opinion in there and a shared value set. And we just don't have these things anymore. And the media is as much to blame for the division in the country, for the fact that we have so much disgusting rhetoric that people's lives and careers have been ended, literally ended, because of what they have done. And at some point, I mean, the pendulum is going to swing, and at some point, there's going to be accountability. And I mean, I loved when my spidey senses were going off when the Washington Post refused um, to endorse the president. But then when we see that they're going to be hiring more conservative opinion writers, they see the writing on the wall to some degree, that if you keep publishing trash and you keep alienating half the country, I mean, you're not going to be able to stay in business much longer. So, I mean, we've seen many instances of this, like even Hugh Hewitt quit the Washington Post because he was on a show where they were saying such asinine and insane things. Um, and even Nate Silver, who rose to fame in the Obama years for his polling expertise or his polling accuracy, and he's still considered by many to be the go-to source, having his finger on the pulse of things that maybe other polls are missing. Whether or not that's true, it's how some people view him and his work. Um, but he has accused pollsters of putting the finger on the scale in this electoral race.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that just came out in the New York Post very recently, like within the last hour, maybe less than that, which is we're seeing a bunch of polls drop that are contrary to the trend, that present a narrative of Harris having recovered and having the momentum. And it's just Operation Demoralize. It's the Operation Demoralize in the last few days. None of these polls make any sense. Some of them are older. They were taken a week or two ago. They're contrary to everything else. Um, and Nate Silver, who doesn't really do polling himself, but he's more a poll analysis and he tries, and people criticize him and people like him, but he's, highly referred to. Um, he tries to sort out the polling garbage from not. And he came out and he said what they are doing in this last few days is trying to create a narrative that the polls that are being dropped now are not accurate. They're, in his words, putting their finger on the scale to keep it close, to keep hope alive for Kamala. And maybe that's something we'll talk about. But we are seeing complete ridiculousness. We're seeing CNN. I saw a clip from something they ran. I don't know if it was their poll or just their analysis. Well, sure, the numbers don't look good for Democrats. Republicans in early voting are turning out way beyond what they ever have before. Okay, so that's the bad news. But the good news is some group polled people and finds that Kamala Harris is up 20 to 25 points among people who have already voted. Does anybody believe that? Is that even possible? Is that even statistically possible? And so they're putting out this garbage and it's being amplified. And what it's meant to do, it's meant to drive down Trump turnout because it is true. Trump still needs to have people show up on election day. And perhaps more than Democrats do. But the numbers across the board of early voting, and we don't know how people voted. We only know how many Republicans voted, how many Democrats compared to prior cycles is way better for Republicans. So they're spinning these new narratives, and we're getting these mind games played. Not only, oh well, the people who voted, who say they voted. Okay, so you take a poll, and then you take a subsection of the poll who say they voted. Then you take a subsection of that who are willing to tell you how they voted. And that subsection of a subsection supposedly has her ahead by 20 to 25 points. It's just not believable. It's just narrative writing. And then what they do is they have all these mind games they're playing. Well, sure, in Nevada, Republicans have unprecedented. Usually there's a big Clark County, which is Vegas, firewall for Democrats. And it doesn't exist this year. And Republicans unprecedented how they've turned out. But but actually, what that means, they're all saying, is Republicans are cannibalizing their election day voters. It's not really real. There's no way of knowing that. It's complete speculation, but you hear those sort of things echoed. It's Operation Demoralize. They are trying to drive down Trump supporters and Republican turnout by making people think it's over. And so this is really the worst I've seen it. Maybe I'm paying closer attention than in the past, but this is really bad.
No, this is by far the worst I've seen in all my years of observing or being part of politics. Now, I know, I mean, I have to be a realist here. I'm sure things were terrible in the mid to late 1860s, and 1800s with regards to political rhetoric when we did have actual fist fights on the Capitol steps among legislators. So I recognize that there have probably been times in the past where things were terrible, but in terms of modernity, the concerted effort to skew things one way, and even with Nate Silver, I think, I mean, he's obviously has recognized that this has been a problem for a long time. And I think it's fair to at least suggest that coming out to say something at this stage in the game is merely to ensure he doesn't lose credibility by ignoring a major problem that we're seeing in the polling across the board, because he's very, I don't say very left leaning, but he definitely has left leaning tendencies. um so I it's just terrible. It is very terrible, very terrible. So if you haven't voted, please do. Like, vote. We voted. My kids got into a somewhat heated discussion on their kid ballot about which fruit was better, strawberry or watermelon. So even they're participating in the democratic process. So yes, it's just awful. Jobs reports. Do you want to talk about the jobs report and how terrible those have been? And I think there's so much gaslighting going on there, just like we saw in the Obama years too, that they would come back after the fact and revise the jobs numbers almost weekly there for a while.
Yeah, so the job numbers came out, and first of all, they've downgraded the last couple of months. I forget what the statistics were, but significant downgrades. So anything that was good that happened in the last 2 to 3 months is out the window. And whereas everybody was expecting job growth of 100,000, it's only 12,000, and it's all public sector. So there was actually a decline in private sector employment. Um, and I saw somebody tweet, and I thought it was kind of funny, that of the 12,000 jobs gained, two of them were Trump, one at McDonald's, one driving the garbage truck.
That is really funny.
And so, um, that's really, it's a disaster, but it's going to be swept aside. Okay, it's going to be swept aside. As we speaking, I'm seeing the Daily Beast reporting on some Epstein tapes about Trump. They're going to do everything. The Daily Beast, which is really the
Oh, they're
bottom tier,
awful.
it's a big influential publication, but in terms of quality, it really is below bottom tier. And they got some Epstein tapes that they're going to drop on Trump. They are doing everything in these closing few days to create October surprises, to distract people from it. The good news is huge percentages of the voters have already voted. I mean, early voting, I've seen statistics in various states, is 60-70% of the
Mhm.
anticipated vote is already in. So we're not really in the days where what happens in the last 3 days is going to create a big shift. But in a close election, you don't need a big shift. You just need a little here and a little there. And so that's what the Democrats are absolutely running through the finish line. I have to give them credit for that. They have not let up, and the media has not let up, and they're pushing all sorts of garbage these last few days that is really hard to counter. The only hope is that people understand what garbage it is and don't appreciate it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's like we talked about last week too. Especially working in campaigns for a little while, it was very enlightening as to how the media works, how stories are put together, how they're floated, how reporters are contacted. There's so many different things like that. But if there was something, if anyone had something on Trump, we 100% would have seen it months ago. There's nothing left. There's nothing left that's valid. There's nothing left that can be verified. They have been after him for 8 years. If they had a smoking gun, it would have been fired by now. Like it just would have. So whatever this is just throwing whatever they can concoct at the wall and hoping that it sticks. Um, yeah, it's just so terrible in every possible way. But I hope that going into election night, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it all, but just we will continue doing what we do. We don't live in fear. We are active and aware and I believe wise and we take precautions, but we don't live in fear of what's to come because like we've talked about before, even if Trump were to win Tuesday night or weeks after Tuesday night, there are still things that are not going to change overnight. The economy is not going to right itself overnight. We don't have a clue as to how many millions of illegal young men are running around in this country, what they're doing. Like, this is a
Yeah, there was
problem.
just a big story out of Chicago, which has been papered over by the media about a guy who shot a visibly Jewish, meaning somebody who dressed in a religious sort of way. So there was no dispute. Person in Chicago, and the media wouldn't name the perp, then wouldn't name where the perp was from, and it's finally coming. And the perp was on video shouting Allahu Akbar right after the shooting, and the media. This was like a week ago, and it finally comes out. It's an illegal migrant from, I think it was Mauritania, um, who is Islamic fundamentalist, who had been arrested by the Biden administration and then was released. And is finally, they've added hate crime charges to it. Totally buried by the media. I guarantee you, 99.9% of the people don't know. This is what's happening in our country. And the media and the Democrats are complicit in it. People are getting shot and killed in this country by people who've come here illegally. And not only did they come here illegally, but they have been detained and then released by the Biden administration. We have no idea what has come into this country in the last 3 years by the
That's right.
tens of thousands. And I have little doubt that there are, whether you call them formal sleeper cells or the equivalent, that people have been sent across the southern border by Iran, by Islamic fundamentalists, probably by China also, for the very purpose of being activated later on. No doubt in my mind. And we
Yeah.
won't know it till it happens. And then we'll
Yeah.
wonder.
No. No, I completely agree. And I mean, to the broader point, elections don't cure things. Elections give us a reprieve from terrible leadership in order to address major problems that we have. But I have watched very discouragingly as a student of early American history. I spent a ton of time in my younger years reading original documents concerning the formulation and foundation of our country, and the degree to which there has been a shift in faith in the executive, a shift in faith in legislators and lawmakers is very concerning. Very concerning. These people will not save you. They will not save your communities. All of these people are interested. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't good people, but they are interested first and foremost in getting reelected and in all the perks and bennies that come from being a federal government or a state employee or whatever, and there's very few fail safes on that system. And so, all of that to say, I don't mean to come across as lecturing or condescending, but every single person listening, every single person in this country is able to do something to positively affect change. Voting is crucial, yes, but you have to understand that it's not going to change just because we get a different president. Not for the better. These things are not going to be cured overnight. Um, and if I have a drum to beat right now, it's that do what you can in your sphere to get out and cause change. Show up at school board meetings, show up at city council meetings. That doesn't take but an hour of your day. There's so many things you can do to help right this ship. Be actively involved in your kids' lives and in their education, in your grandkids' lives and in their education to the extent that that's possible. If everyone took seriously trying to do something, we would not be in this place. If everyone took seriously the fact that changing of the executive is not going to not be in this place. And so I will get off my soapbox now. The other thing, and one of the last things I wanted to talk about, though, which is just so typical of the way that the left works, is how the New York Times is actively trying to set it up going into post election coverage that basically conservative blogs, conservative podcasts, conservative media have been spreading all kinds of falsehoods. And if there's anything that we can count on the left to do, it's to be like massive projection machines. Everything they do, they accuse everyone else of doing. This is really their shtick is so tired and trite. But this was blown up when some of the people contacted about this published the correspondence from the New York Times.
And just not the New York Times, the Washington Post, both are on a push using research done by the despicable, disgusting Media Matters. Okay. So the Media Matters analyzes conservative podcasts and YouTube channels, came up with a list of things that deceptive, as if whatever the New York Times does isn't deceptive. And New York Times is then using that to try to pressure YouTube and I think some of the podcast channels to deplatform. Of course, they don't contact YouTube and say, "Why haven't you deplatformed them?" That's not the way it works. We know how it works. They contact the YouTube and others and say, "Are you aware? Do you have any comment? A study finds that Ben Shapiro or Dan Bongino or whoever has engaged in misinformation. Do you have a response to that?" That's how they do it. Everybody's wise to their game. What they're trying to do is in the closing days of an election to try to get large, influential conservative channels deplatformed and taken down, or at a minimum demonetized, which really wouldn't satisfy their goals. But that's the game. That's why a Rumble was created. That's why people are finding other platforms, other ways to communicate, and that's what's going on. And so it's very fitting that as we come to the end of this cycle, that the media, which has tried to put their thumb on the scale, which has tried to manipulate everything, is now just trying to deplatform people. I mean, they're done trying to persuade, and they're here to deplatform people. And that's the New York Times and the Washington Post are doing that.
Oh, 100%. And it's one of those things too where they're trying to, if for some reason Trump wins the election, that they've already kind of created a platform by which they can run on this electoral manipulation, which goes
Yeah,
back to my point that this is 100% projection on their part. They are the ones doing this. We spend most of our time talking about the things that they are doing, and they don't like being exposed.
yeah. So instead of it being Russia collusion or Russia, bought ads on Facebook like they claimed in 2016, it'll be all these conservative influencers, manipulated audiences on YouTube. And even though it may be too late for them, their goal is to get YouTube to take people down. It's so
Yeah.
transparent and it's so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's just another level of absurdity. They were very successful in doing that in a variety of ways in 2020, of having not just commentators or people with a known platform deplatform anyone who disagreed. So, last and finally, predictions. This is our last podcast before we come back to chat. What I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like next week. Whether I'll be buying more chickens or enjoying the fact that hopefully my dollar will be able to purchase more sometime in the coming years, but we'll see. So what go first? What are your predictions headed into next week?
So logic and reason and analysis tells me this is going to be a very substantial Trump and Republican win. If you look at the early voting, you look at the turnout, you look at all these other things, you look at the polling, which is much tighter than it has been before. Now, it's possible that this is an anomaly, that this year there won't be a Trump undercount in the polling. Maybe that's possible. But everything we're capable of knowing um, points to a significant Trump win. And Republicans picking up the Senate, probably in the 52 to 54 seat range. I think maybe on the higher end of that. And the House, I can't put numbers on it, but if Trump is winning and if Trump is more or less even in the popular vote, then that the Republicans should hold the House. So every logical, analytical part of me says this should be a good year for Trump and Republicans. But there's always that gnawing feeling that they're going to pull something. They've been pulling it for several days now. Fakery, lying, just creating things out of whole cloth, manipulation. So that's my prediction. But the rational part of me says Trump is going to win. The concerned part of me says somehow the Democrats are going to pull it out.
No, I am pretty much in the exact same place, and I would add to that that I fully predict that regardless of the outcome of the election, that the left and all of their tribes are going to become insufferable in ways we've never seen. Whether Harris ends up winning or Trump ends up winning, it's it's going to be rough. The media is either going to be crowing or they're going to be in complete and total meltdown mode. And in that case, they're not going to accept responsibility or accountability. They're going to be looking to blame other people because that's what that whole mentality. I'm sorry, a car drove by. We live in a place where that doesn't happen very often. And one of my dogs is making sure they know that it's not okay.
That's a sign of something. I don't know what it's a sign of, but it's a sign of something.
I know, right?
Mhm. All right. Well, I do predict if Trump wins, there will be major rioting. There will be major violence. We are seeing complete meltdowns over the fact that it's even close. We are seeing mental breakdowns. I've said this many times on Twitter or X, that we are going to see a psychiatric break. We are going to see a psychiatric break on the left, particularly among younger women, based on their behavior so far, that we may never have seen before. The Democrats and the media have whipped that side into such a frenzy as to what is going to happen. Uh, Project 2025, they've whipped them into such a mental frenzy that I do believe we're going to see a psychological phenomenon, the likes of which we haven't seen, where people are going to lose it. And I think if Trump wins, that is an absolute certainty.
I completely agree, and I think it's important too to remember. And I mean, I wouldn't think that any of our listeners would be this way. That it's fine to be glad that Trump wins. Unity is never going to come from the other side. It's just not. They thrive on divisiveness. There has to be contentiousness. There has to be something along those lines in order for them to subsist. And so, I mean, I think I'm not saying we have to run around hugging everybody and be like, let's all get along now. We're one happy family. But I do think the burden of trying to mend anything, if it's mendable, and I'm not even sure that that's possible anymore, does rest on the other side.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody after the election, assuming we still have a country and we're not in a hot
The
civil
internet.
war.
We haven't like been dealing with an EMP and we have no way
Yes.
to contact each other.
Yeah.
But we're prepared in case that happens. But it'll be a brave new world. So, but thank you as always for listening. Be sure to like, share. If you know someone who you think might enjoy this, please send it their way. Contact us if you'd like to. We like to hear your feedback, and you can find more. You can find all these stories, links to everything that we have at legalinsurrection.com, where we have covered everything we discussed today, in a lot more detail than we discussed today, and a lot more. So you can find links to this if you're just listening at legalinsurrection.com/14. Thank y'all for joining us, and Godspeed. Remember, you are the change, and we will talk to you next week, hopefully.